So today we're doing an open class, even on Facebook, because I don't have internet at home, so the only way I can put it up on Patreon for everybody else is going to be through the way it's recorded here on Facebook. So I'm sorry for this happens once in a while. Okay. So we're learning on Baal Shem Tov on the Torah and using it as a source for how to do our therapy, how to think about the psyche, how to think about the soul, and how to build from it some foundations for therapy. So the last three classes we dedicated to we talked about the connection between the Torah coming down into the world and between the soul coming down into life, into the body. And we saw the strong parallels, and the idea of contraction is concentration. And that one of the takeaways from last week was that when we decide between different options, so we're not giving up on parts of our life that could have been, but rather we're concentrating, call it our footprint, our spiritual footprint, into a particular space, into what we choose to do, what we are able to do. And it's not giving up, but rather it's like taking the extract out of the soul and trying to bring more of the soul down into a smaller space. The smaller the space becomes, the more concentrated the soul itself is. And this is something that people go through in life, and it's a different way of looking at why I have to make choices. So we're going to continue with the theme of choices and with free will, and see something quite incredible that the Baal Shem Tov writes on this week's Parsha. It'll be connected a little bit to something that we may have talked about in the past, which is the nature of the final 8 verses in the Torah. Okay? And final 8 verses begin by saying, and Moshe died there. So it's a little bit difficult to understand what's the big deal, but the sages say, how could Moshe write, and Moshe died there? So it must be that these verses were actually written by somebody else, by Joshua. That's the usual answer. That's one answer. The other possibility is that these verses, as we'll see, were written by Moshe himself, bedema. We'll see what this word means. Usually it's translated with tears. Okay? So we'll go to the Baal Shem Tov's teaching about that, which is a lot of times, quoted about from the Gra also. But we'll see that the Baal Shem Tov was the source, apparently, because he says something different from the Gra. It's not exactly the same thing. Okay. In this week's Parsha, what's the connection? That we have something called the breastplate, the choshen. And the choshen was used to receive answers, to know what to do, to make a decision. For instance, I have 2 options before me. The usual example is, should I go to war? Should I not go to war? Should I go to Bavel? Should I not go to Bavel? To Babylon? And the breastplate was used to get an answer. So let's read what the Baal Shem Tov says about this. The psukim are, the verses in the Torah are, and it's Exodus 28, 29 through 30. Today's chitas. And Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel on the breastplate of judgment upon his heart. When he goes into the holy place, meaning when he's serving, all the time that he was serving, he had these 8 special garments for a memorial before God continually. And he shall put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and the Tumim. They don't even try to translate it, because it's a concept. It's like a noun. They're called Urim and Tumim. If I had to literally translate them, I would say the lights and the truth. Basically. It's like something about the lights and the whole truth. The entirety of the truth. What was it exactly? We'll see in a moment. And they shall be upon Aaron's heart, Lev Aharon in Hebrew, when he goes in before God. Okay, so what is this breastplate? The breastplate had 12 stones, 4 rows of 3 stones each. And they had, each stone was dedicated to one tribe. And engraved on the stones were the names of the tribes. But if you do that, then it's not enough. You don't have all 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet if you do that. You're missing a few. So also it added Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's still not enough. So it has Shiftei Ka, Yud K. So here there were also another 2 stones that had 25 letters on each, and that's another example of it. And those were there were just 2 stones. They held up. They were like the shoulder parts that held up the breastplate. The breastplate itself was on his chest, on his heart. And when the question was asked, the breastplate would somehow show the answer. Now everybody understands it. What do you mean shows the answer? It must be, it's not some kind of, wasn't an ancient iPad or something like that. It's not a touch screen. So obviously it's pointing at the person who's asking the question and receiving the answer, seeing it in his mind's eye through the letters that are engraved on the breastplate. In the person's mind.
Oh, yes?
Oh,
But
really?
not in
No.
I wasn't there, but
I thought we saw
Yeah.
we'll see that if, in any case, when we want to take something from that, because we don't have a breastplate, and we certainly don't know how to put an ulim v'tumim into it, we don't even know what that is. There's 2 different opinions, Rashi and the Rambam. Rambam just says the ulim v'tumim is the breastplate, that's it. And Rashi says, no, there was a scroll engraved with that had Hashem's name written on it, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and it was inserted. It was like a diskette, if you remember diskettes. It was inserted behind the breastplate, and that's what made it alive. Say it doesn't really matter. We have neither, so it doesn't matter. And for us, the breastplate and the letters in it, as we'll see, they represent the way that our soul is before it's come down into the world. It's what we called in the past few classes shashuim atzmim. This self pleasure or delight that the person takes in the soul itself. The soul is made out of letters, and they are not yet ordered, meaning there has not been made a decision what the story that they're going to tell is. And we said that you have to start every day, or at least once in a while, you have to reset yourself by going back into that state where the letters are there, but you have to make a decision. It's open now. It's open-ended. It's not completely free form, because there are letters, and we'll see what this means in a moment. There are certain letters there. But with those letters, you can form many different things. Okay? Right. So, what we want to see, first of all, is how the Baal Shem Tov explains this. Then we'll go to a different Baal Shem Tov, which I don't have translated here. I'll just tell you it in short, because it's also too long. And we'll see how all this connects to the decision process in the psyche, and to opening ourselves up to being able to write our story, which is basically what Moshe Rabbeinu is doing. He's telling us the Torah of Moshe. He's telling us the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the whole Torah is the story of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. To understand his life, you have to go back to the creation. And that's true with everybody. But he's the one who's telling, in the end, his story. And that's why his story ends with his death. It doesn't continue on. Because the Torah was something...
It actually answers the question of if it's about Moshe's life, then what's the part before he's born?
What do you mean?
He's only born in Shemite.
Ken. So what's the part
you have to
before?
go back to Bereshit to find out his real story.
Ken.
So that answers the question.
Okay.
Anyone else hear it?
So let's read what he says about the breastplate. He adds something very interesting. It is known, he writes, that the breastplate barely contained all 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Like we said, you had to add letters. And even then, when you added Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and you added Shiftei Ka, Yud-Ke, you needed Shiftei for the Tet. After you added everything, there were still some letters that only appeared once. And if they only appeared once, so how could you write out a full sentence? How could you get a whole thing? So that's a whole answer. Like, let's say you ask, if you just want to say yes or no, so that's easy. For that, you don't need so many letters. You could have just two stones, no letters at all. It's just yes or no. It's just binary. But if you want it to be a little bit more complex, then you have to have more letters. So it says about Shem Tov, it's known that the breastplate barely contained all 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, as the sages have said. Therefore, when they had to ask a question, they used several of the same letters, such as, should I go to Bavel? How were they answered? Now this is very interesting, because what is he saying? Should I go to Bavel? Should I go to Babylon? Or should I not go? This is a simple answer. Yes or no. If you want to make it elaborate, go or stay or al
Maybe he
telech.
wants to know when.
No, here he's saying.
Another location, yeah.
So the meaning here is, which Bavel did you mean? Oh, we thought you meant no. So I think the obvious thing he's implying here is that the question has to be seen in the letters also. That to form a real question, you have to form the question in the letters that you see in the breastplate.
In your mind? Form it in
Well,
your mind?
for us, it's in our mind. For them, it's in the breastplate. But what he's saying is that the question is like the famous saying that for a wise man, the question is half the answer.
But it says Aaron's heart also, not only mine.
Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute.
What does it mean he forms them with the letters? He visualizes
He
the
visualizes the question
letters
in the breastplate letters. So for us, it's a little bit easier because we don't have. I'm not saying that people have to draw a breastplate and try to see it there. You can see it in your mind's eye. It's enough.
Today, people who are completely paralyzed, they have such a thing, and they just look at the letters, and that's how they speak.
Okay, but here I'm saying that the letters exist before, and you see it shining. But it's true. I mean, what we're doing today with people who have some kind of degenerative neurological disease is we're basically reenacting that the mind, all it needs is just the screen on which to project its thoughts. As far as the mind is concerned, that's already like a full life. The mind. The body wants much more. The body would like to do many, many things that sometimes it can't.
This is it. People who have eyes.
Yeah, less.
Only the eyes.
Okay. So he's implying that you need to see the question in writing. You have to see it in letters. Really, when I was preparing this year, it was right after I read something, and after a few other things that I had heard, and that I have to say distresses me at some level, that it's something that I've learned over the years working with the Rav, with Rav Ginsburg, is that if you don't write what you hear, you don't understand what you heard. It's a very, very big principle in learning. that if you go to a shira and you don't write what you've heard, and I'm not talking about taking notes. And notes is the first stage, but it's not the final stage at all. And if you don't do that, you don't really understand what you have been told. The strongest example that became famous in the last few years, I don't remember names, I'm sorry, was a woman who was working on father's rights for children. And she was very, very anti that. And she wanted to make a documentary, I don't remember her name. She wanted to make a documentary, and she went around the United States and Canada, and she interviewed something like 500 different fathers who had lost all custody of their children, or most of the custody over their children in divorces. And she said she came with an open mind, and she thought she'd come with an open mind. She asked questions, but she said she was staunchly against their whole point of view, and it was clear to her that it was wrong. And she filmed for about a year and a half. She did interviews and filmed. And then, like any good person who does research documentaries, she went back home and she started transcribing, and she didn't use a transcription service. She did it herself, the interviews. And she says, as she progressed in writing and reading what she herself had been discussing with them, the first thing that she noticed was that she had not heard what they had said. The second thing she noticed, took a longer time, was she was completely biased in how she even asked the questions, and she thought she was completely neutral. And it caused her to completely change her opinion. And she made there's a TED talk from her. I don't remember what her name is, I'm sorry. You have to find her. And without getting into the issue itself, which to me is non-material at the moment, the process that she went through is exactly the process that you go through when you use writing. Writing solidifies, we'll see. Okay? Because as long as you're still hearing the words in your mind, in your mind's eye, or here it's your mind's ear, as long as you can't see the words, they're still, as we'll see, they're mixed up, and you use your bias to interpret them. You don't actually see the words. You rather, somehow the psyche arranges them in the way that you want to hear them. But the moment that it becomes written, something happens. It becomes objective. And it's sort of like the difference between sight and sound in general, or sight and hearing. That what you see is objective. And how you understand, which is related to hearing, that's subjective. And you have to you have to move things. So I think somebody just, so Jamika, she put she put so when you go to Facebook, she put the YouTube.
Like Moshe putting ink on his forehead.
Okay, we'll see. So you have to, so making it into actual words and letters that you see, that solidifies it, makes it objective, and makes it into, let's say, that's when the choice is made, like how you're actually going to write it down. That's when the choice is made, that this is what was said. If you're transcribing, it'll be very objective, it's exactly what was said. But if you're not transcribing, if you're asking yourself a question, and there's no transcription, I don't know what the answer is, but even the question I need to put in writing, in my mind's eye, not in my mind's ear. Meaning the process has to involve seeing the letters, even in the question. And then the question can become half the answer. So the simplest thing that you would say is that however in the end I phrase the question, the answer is made up of the same letters. And that's what he wants to say here. Okay. That the way that I phrase the question, let's say here it's, ha'elech lebavel. So it has in Hey, Aleph, Lamed, Chaf, Lamed, Bet, Bet, Lamed. So
It's amazing.
those 8 letters, ha'elech lebavel, they become the letters from which the answer is made. That's the ideal way, meaning that the way, that's what it means, that the Chacham's question, the wise man's question, it's specifically it says the Chacham, because Chochmah is related to sight, the very choice of letters to use for the question solidifies what the answer will be. It begins to bring it into being. And it can be just a permutation, it might be, just a permutation of the very letters that you used for the question. So this is an interesting technique to try, just to try with questions that you have about life. Just to write out the question, even if you're only doing it in English, because you only know English, but even do it in English and try to see whether there's, inside the letters themselves, there's already the answer that you were looking for.
Have you ever done that?
No. They don't-
Great theory.
Just so we would have an idea, question about life.
Okay, and so,
So either
is this the house that I'm looking for? Maybe that's the way you say it. And then suddenly it transposes into something else. Looking for, maybe it's for us, I don't know. Not for us, I don't know what comes out of it. Okay, it's a lot. I mean, the idea would be to make it very terse. That's why Hebrew is much better. Hebrew is much, much shorter. It's more rich than English is, so it really shortens into a few letters, and you can play with it. That, again, that's in theory, but it doesn't matter so much. What I'm really interested in is the process of bringing it down, making it more real, more objective, by writing it out. By again, writing in my mind's eye. I don't have to actually write it out. Although I know people will hear this and now they'll start writing and try playing. So maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I don't know. But what here he's definitely talking about is that in the mind's eye, you have to be able to see the question has to be concrete enough that you can actually see it in your mind's eye. If you can't see it as words that are actually written out, you won't be able to concrete the letters of your soul into an answer. Again, it's your soul coming down. So it must be some kind of funnel that's deciding what needs to be selected here, what needs to be chosen. So before we go any further, let's just say a small hint, an allusion that's brought everywhere about this, that how do you say the heart of Aaron in Hebrew? Lev Aaron. What do these two words have in common? So Aaron in Gematria is 256. And heart, Lev, is 32. Those two numbers, 32 and 256, they're both powers of 2. 256 is 2 to the 8th. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 8 times. And 32 is 2 to the 5th. If I would multiply them, it would be 2 to the 13th, which is something very important in Aaron himself, because Aaron is 13 is love, and Aaron is he's the Kotev Alchut Bnei Israel Be'ava. He's the one who gives love in his blessing. He does everything through love. He's the embodiment of love, Isha Chesed. He's the man of loving kindness. But what this implies when something is a power of 2 is what we call a decision tree. A decision tree. That if at first you have 2 options and each one has 2, that at first you have 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, then 64, 128, and then 256, and so on. It's called a decision tree. It's basically what everybody goes through when they have to make a decision. There's this option and that. Not always do you have all the options in each place. But the basic decision tree is the powers of 2. That's how it's described. And in computers, it's used a lot in sorting algorithms and all kinds of techniques. It's called a binary tree. It's what we call a binary tree. So that's just in passing. We'll see as we go on that it becomes even stronger, this whole idea. What was the main, he says here, Alech leBavel, should I go to Bavel? What is he going to Bavel for? He's going to fight a war. That's what he has to decide. Is that most of these questions that were asked of the breastplate were about wars. Should we go out to war or not go out to war? It's sort of like in America, that the president can have 100 days of war without going to Congress. But at some point he has to go to Congress and get their permission after 100 days. So the same idea existed in Yiddishkeit, except that you had to go right away. To go to a war, you had to go ask the breastplate. That was like the Congress, in a certain sense. It's everybody sitting there, and the answer had to come from there, whether it's agreed upon or not. So even a king needed some permission from above. What is that called when you go to war? So, or why did this become the central theme of the breastplate? Like, because it was a binary decision.
Yes or no?
Should I go or not go? And that was the first time that it's mentioned. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't use the breastplate ever. He himself never used it. Why? Because he spoke to Hashem face to face. He didn't need it. But it means that this whole process of the breastplate is when you don't have Moshe Rabbeinu's level of prophecy. You don't have such a clear indication of what you need to do. So it had to come down. So when it came down, the process was, the first one to use it was Joshua. And specifically it says that when should he ask the breastplate? When he goes out to war. To decide whether to go out or not to go out.
Was the Kohen Gadol needed to interpret what it was saying?
Right.
Yoshua
Right.
couldn't interpret it.
No. No, he can only ask the question. The answer had to come from what the Kohen saw. In a certain sense, you could say that that's like a distribution of power or division of different branches, so that the Kohen has to also agree that this is the right time. So getting back to this idea, it was a binary decision to go or not to go, and it's called leotzi uleavi, to take out or to bring in. And that's how the word army is explained in Hebrew, tzava, which means leotzi v'leavi, to take out and to bring in. And really, tzava, the word that it comes from means character. Tzivyon. Tzivyon is the Hebrew word. So it's like saying that the decisions that you make, whether
Is with an olive, like Tzavah or
no aleph, tzadik bet, yud vav nun. If you want to think about why the tzav is called a tzav, why is a turtle called a turtle? Because-
it either goes into a shell or
Oh,
goes out.
so that's one possibility, that it has an in and out. We don't know if the tzav today is the same tzav as the Torah means, but what it would mean is that it has tremendous character, meaning it's something that you can't move. And that's how you think of a turtle, that it's a hard shell, and it knows what it is. You can't do anything to it. It's like something that's very concrete, something that's very defined. So the result of leotzi or leavi, whether you want to go out or come in, is what creates the character. And those decisions, should I or should I not? And when I decide, that gives me my tzivyon, it gives me my character, who I am. And like we said, it concentrates me. So now he says, how were they answered? If there's only a few letters there, how can they be answered? So this is where the Baal Shem Tov adds something to stop making this so mystical and begin to make it more psychological. He says like this: this is a very great mystery. There is a very great mystery in this. This is his grandson speaking. I heard from my grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, that each of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet contains within it all the other letters of the alphabet. And so somebody added except for the letter Mem. So it's certainly not true. It's an incorrect addition. What's the idea? Because whoever read this, he understood that what he's saying is that every letter has a filling. So when I write Aleph, it's really Aleph Lamed Pei. Bet is Bet Yud Taf. And I can get to all the letters just from, meaning I have a lot more letters if I just open up the fillings. So what he means to say, if he means to say that you need more letters, all you need to do is open them up. And how many times do you open them up? Twice. According to Arizal, you open letter, you fill them twice. So Aleph becomes Aleph Lamed Pei, and the Aleph Lamed Pei itself is Aleph Lamed Pei, Pei, Aleph, Pei, Aleph. Again, you do twice, a recursion. And so you get many, many letters. Just out of the Aleph, you get 8. And out of the Bet, you'll get 9. And so on. There's many letters, as many as you want. What is the process of filling in the psyche? What is it talking about? It's talking about dat. It's talking about consciousness. Meaning, our great addition to the Torah now is that we fill it. Our generations especially, it's called Bechol Drachecha Da'eu, is that we're not asking any more questions about halacha, certainly not every Jew here. Meaning, if all our purpose was just to increase Torah commentary and more halacha, so we'd be a waste of time, all of us, because we can't do that. We're not poskim. We don't know Torah that well. So what can we add? So the understanding of the Baal Shem Tov is that what we do in our lives is that the very decisions that we make in every day, b'chol drachecha, in all your ways, know Him. We try to find Hashem. So we're opening the Torah by adding our consciousness. We're saying, everything that I learned, even though I'm not adding more Torah per se, I'm adding consciousness of Hashem into the world itself. That whatever happens to me, my goal is to add the consciousness of Hashem into it. Meaning, this is, like the Baal Shem Tov said, everything that I see has to be a connection to Hashem, has to create a connection, some dat. That means a connection. So the who know Him is be connected to Him in everything that happens to me. Meaning, search for Hashem in everything. What is Hashem trying to tell me? What's the message behind this? Is this something that came up so strange? It took me something like, I guess, 35 years to at least come up with something. It was a movie that I saw when I was really young. It's called Brewster's Millions. It's a crazy movie. It's got an incredible premise. It was very entertaining. It's a guy who already, I think, passed away. I don't remember his name. And he finds out that he's just inherited $400 million. But there's a catch. This was $400 million sometime in the 80s, so I don't know what it would be today. But the catch is that if he wants the 400 million, he has to spend 40 million in 1 month and have nothing to show for it at the end. Have nothing left. You can't buy a yacht, you can't buy a building, none of these things. And you need an accountant who will, like, there was no...
Charity.
He gave to charities also. It has to nothing can be left over from this 40 million. If he's successful, he gets the 400. If he's not successful, so he gets like nothing. And if he doesn't want to try, so he gets 10 million now and he can go home. So he thought and he said, right away, I want the 400 million. And then he goes through this whole month of trying to burn money. Basically what it is. So these words, burn money, didn't come to my mind until last night when I taught last night. And suddenly I realized that that's like an image for understanding what the river of fire in Shemayim is. What does it mean? That you need a river of fire to forget your previous conceptions of what pleasure is. What was the guy who bequeathed the money to him trying to do? He was trying to get him not to think small. And don't think about throwing another party, drinking more, because he said, what a waste. I want to graduate you to the next level, because $400 million is not something that you just squander on nonsense. So he said, I'm going to get it completely out of your system. I'm going to get you to burn 40 million, meaning burn all the fat off your body. Everything that you have in your conception of what pleasure could be, I want you to burn it out. Completely. Get all the pleasure you want in a month. With $40 million, you can buy incredible amounts of pleasure. For you, your friends, the whole world. And he needed a receipt, so he couldn't just throw the money out. He had to be
But like,
accountable
you
to
couldn't
what
go
he was
buy
doing.
a car.
Couldn't go buy a car.
Because
You
then
could
you
only
have
rent it.
something.
Okay?
Yeah.
So he found a way. In the end, he runs for office, and that turns out to be the best way to burn the money. But the point was that suddenly last night I realized that what I saw this so many years ago for was to give me a mashal for what it means to burn out. Why we use that concept, to burn money, because it burns out the lower levels of understanding of what pleasure is in order to graduate to a higher level.
Where's this from?
So it's called Rooster's Millions. That's the name of the movie.
No, the concept, the river of fire.
That's Nahal. That's the famous thing we've talked about many times. So you can also watch from yesterday's class.
Just remind
It just means that at every level of Gan Eden, every level of
Where
paradise,
is that from?
Zohar says, Nahal. That it from each level to level that the soul progresses, it has to go through a river of fire. And the reason is because it burns off the previous conception of what pleasure is. Because what's waiting for you at the higher level, if you're still small-minded and you're thinking about small things, you won't be able to appreciate what you're being shown now.
So then it seems like, why do they say youth is wasted on young? I mean, if this is what we're supposed to do, if we're supposed to burn off all our stupid desires in the beginning,
Not a Buddhist or a yogi. Yeah, they do that.
Is that it? Could be. You have to think about it more, but on the face of it, yes. That's why as you grow older, it's wasted. When they say wasted, what they mean is that the health is wasted.
no, it's not just health.
It's mostly the way.
Everything. You're not
It's the
doing
health and
anything
the energy.
satisfying.
The health and the energy. That after you've gone, been there, done that, and then you begin to appreciate what's really important. So now you want to have health and energy.
But it's always been looked at as a negative, and this looks at it as a positive.
Okay. Okay. So that's just an example of what it means that everything that you see you're supposed to take a lesson from. So for whatever reason we had HBO when I was growing up, and I had to see this movie. Then only 35 years later it came to me what I can take from it for Avodat Hashem as an example. That even a person in this world can appreciate what it means to graduate from one level of pleasure to a higher level. That it's a much greater, and the only way you can do it is by burning. You have to burn a ton of fat in order to get to it. Okay. So now getting back to this. So says the Baal Shem Tov that it's all about filling the letters. And filling the letters in the psyche means that it's adding meaning to things. Meaning, instead of a letter just being a letter, it becomes a word. So a letter doesn't have meaning. If you just say Aleph, the letter itself, just by itself, it has no meaning. Which is why I'm not chayav and Shabbos if I just write one letter. From the Torah, I'm not chayav. Chazal will say not to write even one letter. Why? Because it's not a word. The minimum word is 2 letters. But really, 3 letters has meaning. Even 2 letters is not considered to be really meaning yet. You need 3 in order to have meaning. So, when I open the letter up, instead of Aleph, just one symbol, it becomes 3. Aleph, Lamed, Pei. We say it that way. It means Aleph. It means to teach. So suddenly the letter has meaning. Bet becomes bait. Again, Gimel becomes Gmor, give. Dalet becomes a door, or Dalat, which means a poor person or somebody who doesn't have, and so on. So all the letters, they begin to have meaning. So when the Baal Shem Tov says that you open it up, what he's saying is that we see by adding meaning. Meaning, we see the meaning of Torah by adding the meaning that comes by applying it to our lives. Because we don't know how to add most of us don't know how to add another book there will be a book of halachos. We don't know how to do that. And most of us have to ask somebody else, so what do you do? Maybe we can write a commentary,
This is
but
oral
that
law?
commentary would come from our meaning that we apply to
Is it
the Torah.
oral law?
Can. But we, oral laws, again, everybody thinks that they know, especially in the JTS. Everybody knows already how to write halacha. Or in HUC or wherever they think they are. They think they know. I know that I don't know. But what I do know is that Hashem expects from me, and that's what the Baal Shem Tov taught, that I can apply the Torah into meaning in my life. And that means b'chol d'rachecha deu. That means to know Hashem in all your ways. So it's really that the process, the psychological process that I go through in life, that is my divine service. Okay. So now, so we said there's a decision process here, a binary tree. There has to be made some kind of decision. And there are letters now. And I open these letters up by looking for the meaning in what I'm asking or in my life or what it is. And from that I want to come to an answer. So now we have to understand the difference between the breastplate and how it worked by Moshe Rabbeinu. So let's see a different Torah before we finish this. So we said that the last 8 verses of the Torah Moshe wrote, and the Gemara asks in Bava Batra, how did he write them? Why is it difficult how he wrote them? Because it says Vayamot Sham Moshe Eved Hashem. It says there that Moshe died. How could he die and write it at the same time? So for years I didn't understand. Well, what's the question? What do you mean? He wrote what would happen, but that's not what it says. Vayamot means in the past. He already died. So if Moshe wrote this, he can't write something that's not true. Why is this such a big difficulty? Because Moshe writes literally. That's what we say, that there's always pshat in the Torah.
If you die before you die to your tafkid, like you surrender
That's,
all
so,
that you
so
are,
then there's no
then
pshat
you're
here.
done.
So
You're
then there's no
dying,
pshat.
really. You're
You took away the literal meaning. And we say we have a principle that everything that's in the 5 books of Moshe Rabbeinu has literal meaning. Simple literal meaning. Not a symbolic meaning. It also has symbolic meaning. It also has many levels of meaning. But you can't take away the literal meaning. There has to be a pshat here. That's something that happened. And Vayamot Moshe means he died. So if he died, how could he write this? That's the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah and everybody else's prophecy. Physically, he has to die. So how can he write? So first of all, there's a story like this about the Midler Rebbe. It says the Midler Rebbe, when he passed away, it was on a Tuesday, he was in the middle of writing the mimer that he had said the Shabbos before. And he died in the middle of writing a sentence. And it says that after he passed away, he continued writing 3 words. And the three words were Le'or be'or ha'chaim, to light in the light of life. And he ended with chaim. But they said he had already passed away when he did this. Said in any case, it's unheard of. Anyway, so that's just an example from recent history. There's a claim that he was still alive when he wrote it. So either it's fantastic or it's trying to tell us something.
How did they know they saw it?
They saw it. They saw that he was already.
Yeah, it wasn't like Joshua wrote it or something.
So there are all kinds of attempts. So it's the simplest answer. They said, yeah, Yoshua wrote this. And then you say that the last 8 verses were written by Joshua. What's the big deal? Says the Gemara, you can't say that. How can you say that? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, on the day they passed away, he gave the full Sefer Torah to his tribe, to the tribe of Levi, sorry. So either it was a full Sefer Torah and it's kosher, or it's not. So if it was missing 8 sentences, 8 verses, so it's not a full Sefer Torah, it's not kosher.
It's like a chicken, they say, when you cut off the head, it carries on running. Yeah, no.
Yeah, Ari,
It depends on your definition of death.
exactly. Look, Ari Fooled went running after the Mechaber.
Maybe his heart
He was
stopped, but
already
his head was
gone.
So
Okay.
It's involuntary.
So there's a different answer. Because this is a real halachic question, how can you give a Sefer Torah that's missing 8 verses? You can't. You can't complete it afterwards and say that he gave a full Sefer. He didn't give a full Sefer. So there's the answer that says he wrote it bedema, crying. That's how it's usually understood. Bedema means that he was crying. No, so what? So if he's crying, that makes it better.
You can't see
He
what
still didn't die. So it doesn't solve the question. So the Baal Shem Tov gives an incredible answer. And there must be an earlier source, but we haven't been able to find it. We've been looking for the last 2 years. If there's another source, it's interesting to find where he knew this from. But he gives a tremendous answer. And it's mamish pshat, like understanding the Gemara differently. He says, the words are, Moshe kotev bedema. He was writing with tears. That's what it seems like. So somebody understood tears, meaning he wrote it, but he wrote it with the drops of tears.
not with ink.
And so that solves the problem of how he could give the Sefer, because at some level he had written it, and it's a complete Sefer, but it doesn't solve the problem of it didn't happen yet.
He must have opened up the letters.
So the Baal Shem Tov says an incredible pshat. He says, Dema also means in Hebrew something that is mixed up. Mixed up. Something that's mixed. A mixture with an ayin.
How do you spell it? Daled Yud?
Daled Mem Ayin. There's a similar word with an aleph called Dmai that everybody is familiar with who learns Torah. Dmai means that it's truma that you don't know its status, or rather produce that you don't know whether truma was taken from it, wasn't taken from it. It's questionable. But there's another word which is dema, which Rashi even says, I'm not sure exactly how dimatcha it's called. I'm not sure exactly how to build the etymology of this word, but it's in different places in the Mishnah we understand that type of dema means a mixture of things. So says the Baal Shem Tov, Moshe Rabbeinu wrote all the letters, okay, and then they rearranged themselves after he passed away.
Wow.
That's his answer. Seems a little
Weird.
supernatural, but the Sefer Torah would have all the letters. The simple answer would be that they're even in order, but they're not divided yet into words. And that's enough to make a mixture. That you don't know how to read this. And think about our Urim v'Tumim. That when you write out your question, if you see it just as letters, they have no order to them. They could be many things. Like we said before, you might want to permute them. They might spell something else. So he gives this unbelievable. Why is this so unbelievable? Because he's not trying to teach you something supernatural about reality. What he's trying to tell you, and he makes it very clear, is that until there's a decision about how things will turn out, everything exists in potential. It just has to be decided upon. Meaning all the potential, all the letters are there. The decision will make it either this way or that way. Meaning the structure is really our decision. The structure of life comes from our decisions. The energy and all the potential is already there. Like we said, that the soul is coming down, and every decision that I make, to come in or to go out, is really defining what the story of my life will be. In the same way that Moshe wrote his story this way.
This is free will.
And this is free will. The free will is to write, the letters already exist, as it were, but the decision is what you're going to make of these
Theoretically,
letters.
the letters knew what he wanted, his intention.
Here it's like, again, the letters answer to your intention. The life answers to you're free to write it however you want. But it's not completely free. We said it's not completely free form, because there are letters there. Your soul is something or other. There are already letters there, but you have to decide what, within the limits of those letters, will be written. What will be the story? And where do you go to do this? Into Shashuim Atzmim. That's what we talked about the last 3 weeks. that you have to have a place where you're able to play. And to play means, in the psyche, it means that there's many options. Or maybe even just two options, it doesn't matter. But there are options, everything's open. And I have to decide. And when I decide, I concentrate. Concentrate means that these letters could have said many things. And now they say one thing. And all the different meanings that could have been there are now within what I've decided that they say. So what does this mean? That every person can receive, this is what's called divine inspiration, like from the breastplate, it's from the lev, it's from the heart. That you're writing your story. Now, again, it's not free form. I can't decide that I'm going to grow another arm, because letters don't allow that. This is the body that I have in that sense. It's the concrete already that's here. But exactly what the story will be, given these letters, that's up to you. But what we learn from this week's Parsha is that you have to visualize it. You have to actually see it. So whether you write it out or in the mind's eye, which is the strongest, that's what's called Shashuim. Shashuim, the delight.
Play with the letters.
And that's what it says, that the Torah was before Hashem we said, even the 2,000 years, we call that Shashuim. The 2,000 years, the Torah was before the world, meaning that the letters were in whatever order, they were mixed up, they were bedema. And Hashem put them in order to create the world. So He created this world with this particular order of the letters.
And he said in the future we'll read the Torah differently.
Yes.
Okay. The Ramban, in the introduction to his commentary on Torah, he says, I can read the Torah differently. He brings the first two psukim, divided differently, and suddenly it says something else. So it's not so important.
That's for the future.
אבל במה זה also עמד? Then it's the stood.
Okay.
Or it's like we discovered the codes.
So that's the code of life. The codes in Torah are not so interested in.
I
Well,
don't
what
know,
I-
when I was going through Baal Tshuva process, I went to something where I showed the codes of something there,
touched
and it like blew me away.
So let's do something like a real Torah code, not the way that they do it there. How many letters are there in the last eight psukim? So this is something that was already counted. The Ramav Pano, he counted, and he came to an unbelievable thing. There's 112 words and 408 letters. So the simon that he right away gives, it's like it yells at you when you know these things, is that 112 is Yabuk.
The river, the Yabok River.
Okay, there's a place called Yabuk where Yaakov.
Yes.
Okay, but really, what does it mean? What does Yabuk mean? It's the divine names, like you just said, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elokim, and Ekyeh, all together equal 112. Those are the three intellectual, the names of the three intellectual sfirot.
Yud Kei Vav Kei Ekyeh, and what's the third one?
And Elokim.
Elohim.
What does he want to say by that? So he leaves it like that. The 408 he writes as cheshek, which means will. It's another name for will. But Yabok, in what does it represent? So in Kabbalah, Yabok is the movement between this world and the next. It's called the Ma'avar Yabok. That's what Moshe was going through. These 112 words are like his, he called in a certain sense, his last act in the world. They hint themselves to his movement from this world to the next, from being in a physical body to not being in a physical body.
Why is it called Yabok? What's the connection?
So I'll try to say something in the way of Drush. That's what the Zohar says.
From the
Because
name
you're
of this river.
crossing
Ma'avar
over.
Yabok.
It comes from there,
Yeah.
and he's moving from this world.
Yichud Bracha Kedusha, according to the Baal Shem Tov. There's many things behind it. I'll say something in a moment that came from Reb Nachman. But there's 112 words there and 408 letters. And the 408 are cheshek. Cheshek is a word that means will, but it's more than that. It's cheshek, yeshcha cheshek. You know, cheshek is like...
Kids always say, "Any fish."
it's a craving. It's like almost a
Nobody.
craving. It's not exactly a...
No
It's like
fun.
I feel like it or I don't feel like it.
It's a desire.
Positive.
It's a strong desire. Cheshek is like a strong desire. There's other meanings to it. It also comes from the word nechshak. Like this book that I just saw before, Aviva Zorenberg wrote, The Beginnings of Desire. If you had to translate it into Hebrew, it would say Reshit HaCheshek. But I don't know if that's the word she meant. But desire, like that Adam was created in the world to have some kind of cheshek, to have some kind of desire. That's why she called it that. Because the first thing that we see in the story of Adam is that there's some desire for something. He wants something. If a person is healthy, if they want something, what's the problem? That all we want is only in the physical. All our will is in the physical. You should have, the Rebbe tried to teach people, somebody has 100, wants 200. So the fact that it's like that in the physical, we know. But it should be like that in the spiritual also. That the person should have will. If he doesn't have will, he's not healthy. So the fact that everybody has will, or most people who are healthy have will in the physical, that means that their animal soul is alive and kicking. But if you don't have will in the spiritual, where are you going tomorrow? I said this a few times in the last few days because I loved it. I read it on Shabbos from Reb Nachman. That if the sky above you doesn't become the ground under you, meaning if the sky above you yesterday, what you felt was the heavens above you, didn't become the ground that you're walking on today, then what did you do yesterday? That's what it means to move. So spiritually, you should have a lot of cheshek, you should have a lot of will. It means that the divine soul is also healthy. So he says that's his will. He even expresses it in the last moments when he's passing from this world to the next, through Yabok, through these 112 words. But Reb Nachman says something amazing that I looked for it. Nobody else says anything like this. He suddenly connects the word Yabok to a different word, which has the same letters exactly, and he calls it Baki. To be Baki means to be well-versed. And what do you need to be well-versed in? He says, Baki, Bet Kuf Yud. Instead of Yud, Bet Kuf. It's Bet Kuf Yud, to be Baki, to be well-versed, to be regular in. What should you be regular in? Baki beratzo uvaki b'shov. Which is the way that Yechezkel says to come out and come in. Ratzo v'shov, to run and return, is the same thing as yotzeh v'ba, like we said before about tzava. That all these decisions, meaning you have to not be afraid to posit these questions in your shashuim, in your intellectual delight. Posit the question and see what answer comes out. That's to be baki beratzo, baki b'shov, to act like a king. You're like a king who has to ask all the time, do I do it like this or do I do it like that? Why? Because that's what Hashem put you in the world for. For what? According to the Baal Shem Tov, for your free will, to decide.
We're asking ourselves.
Okay? It's like you're asking yourself. That's why I said it's all in the mind's eye. It's not that the Choshen would light up. It was light up, so settled. So that's the different level of existence. The normal level of existence is that the meaning comes from you. It has to come from you. Again, this doesn't mean that a person does whatever he wants. The Torah says, Allah says I should do like this, I do like this. But to get the meaning, to instill the meaning, to instill myself into this, and to write all the stuff that the Torah doesn't talk about, which is B'chol D'rachecha, your ways, not Hashem's ways, but my ways, that I want to bring Hashem into. So by that, my free will is the most important thing, because that's what brings it in. That's what brings Hashem's presence into my life. That's what makes my life into a book that's worth writing.
I'm going to quote you on that.
So I said that I started, I didn't finish, but that the fact that we don't write everything that we hear, meaning especially when we learn, that we don't transform it into, not, again, it's not just what the notes that I write when I'm listening, because that's like the notes that this woman took when she was interviewing. She took notes.
Just so she didn't forget.
But the transcription that happens afterwards, that's what reveals all the inner meaning. That's what he's trying to say here, in my opinion. He's trying to say that the moment that you see it in writing, that's when the inner meaning is divulged. That's when you uncover the inner meaning for you. And until you do that, then it just remains like some subjective thing. You heard it the way you always hear things, but you can't get something new out of it. You can't get a new answer from it. The new answer comes from writing it out. And everybody who writes knows that this is an incredible process, which is why it's so difficult. I'm not talking about writing fiction. Writing fiction has its own problems. It also goes through that, which you have to see what do I feel and how do I react, and I try to build the character the way that I would build something that looks real. But in nonfiction, especially in Torah, hearing what it actually says, this is for us. This is like Torah shebichtav. It's like written Torah. You have to transform it from the oral back into the written, and then suddenly it's like the choshen. Suddenly it gives you all these answers you didn't think of. Yeah.
I would think teaching it is really what makes it part of you, more than writing it
But you
down.
have to write it.
Unfortunately, I can tell you that at least for me that doesn't work.
Really?
The stuff that I've written, I remember. And and that's a famous thing from, we talked about this many times, the story from the Reb Nachum of Chernobyl, that the book we have from him, Orei Naim, is what he didn't remember that he taught. All the stuff that somebody was writing down for the last 2 years of his life, everything that he said, and then he brought it to him just before he passed away, a few months before he passed away. And most of it he threw out, and some of it he gave back to him. He said it was a small percentage of what he gave to him. He said, this is the good stuff. This he should publish after I pass away. Why? Because this I don't remember that I said. So what I remember maybe is not, I remember because that's how I think. It's like even hearing myself, it's like speaking to hear myself speak. But I see it when we write things for Rav Ginsburg, and then he goes over it. So the stuff that he really begins to, like, some stuff he'll just let it go, and then suddenly he'll dwell on a point and really develop it. And so we also asked him, why this and not this? He says, because this I don't remember that I said. Because this is something that, wow, I read this and it was, ooh, this is interesting. I didn't think about it this way. So how did you say it? I said it. I don't know how it came out.
Because it just comes down.
Okay.